Welcome to B'madzaje Ginonindwa. This podcast is produced by the Communications Department at the Anishinaabeg Nation. We will be focusing on the issues and initiatives in Anishinaabeg Nation territory. I'm your host, Lisa Abel. Happy New Year, and welcome to our first episode of 2026. At the most recent Anishinaabeg Nation Grand Council, the Chiefs in Assembly resolved to move forward with a relationship agreement between the Anishinaabeg Nation and the Health Sciences North Research Institute, also known as HSNRI. This research institute is based in Greater Sudbury and supports collaborative research efforts amongst clinicians, researchers, learners, regional partners, and industry to generate findings and solutions for the people of Northeastern Ontario. Anishinaabeg Nation and HSNRI plan to develop research protocols with our interested member First Nations. Ethically sound research and findings can empower First Nations to improve health and environmental outcomes. However, many First Nations have been hesitant to participate in research due to negative experiences in the past, which may have included inadequate consent, misappropriation of Indigenous knowledge, lack of data control, and few community benefits. By developing and adopting their own research protocols, First Nations are creating the tools to assert their own data sovereignty and ensure that research in their communities respects Indigenous methods, knowledge, and perspectives, and is aligned with their goals and values. To discuss these concepts of Indigenous data sovereignty and how this relationship protocol may move forward, I spoke with Riley Restool, the Clinical Research Coordinator of Indigenous Health at HSNRI. Riley Restool is an Anishinaabe from Dokis First Nation and is a PhD student, an Anishinaabemowin learner, a community youth representative, and a small business owner. Last October, Riley delivered a keynote presentation on Indigenous data sovereignty in health research at the Anishinaabeg Nation's 11th Annual Health Conference. In our conversation, we talked about why it's so important for First Nations to have a say in research and create their own data governance plans, as well as how Riley's connection to her Anishinaabe community, culture, and language helps her to advocate for research that is strengths-based and respects our worldviews. Bonjour, Riley. Miigwech for joining us today on B'madzaje Ginonindwa. Miigwech.
Ani, miigwech for having me.
So to start, would you like to tell us a little bit about yourself, where you're from, and your work?
Ani Kinoea, Wabe Kahiwis Gu Indigenakas, Kikindad Ndonjaba, Wajash Gindondem. My name is Riley Restool. I'm from Dokis First Nation. My family clan is the Muskrat. Right now I'm living in Sturgeon Falls. I work in Sudbury and I go to school in Saskatchewan. So I'm doing a lot of different things, but all from the comfort of my home. Okay, I don't know where to start because I'm doing a lot right now. First and foremost, I am the current youth representative for my community. I am Miss Kikindad, Miss Dokis First Nation. What this means is that I essentially travel to different communities, attend different events like powwows and round dances, and just talk about Dokis. I also do a lot of giving back to my community in the form of planning events and workshops. I'm going to be hosting a special at our powwow in June. So just a lot of different things there in my role as Miss Kikindad. Another thing that I touched on is that I'm a student. So I'm currently a interdisciplinary studies PhD student at the University of Saskatchewan. I'm studying perinatal health policy through the lens of the Tikanagan. So trying to see how we can make health policy and just healthcare in general safer for our people with incorporating our teachings in that process. as part of my PhD training, I'm also a full-time Nishnabemwin student. I'm part of the second ever cohort with Ninataguns Learning. And so I spend a lot of my time studying our language and learning how to speak, getting comfortable with getting my words out, just so that I understand our stories and our teachings in the way that they were intended, the way that they were taught in our language. And then on top of all that, I do have a job as well. So I'm the clinical research coordinator of Indigenous Health at the Health Sciences North Research Institute. There, I work closely with various researchers and research teams. I work with the Indigenous Health team at Health Sciences North. And then I also work with different community health partners and organizations and different community representatives to create a safe environment for Indigenous health research at the hospital. So making sure that we're taking on projects that the community actually wants and needs, but also that within those projects, we're utilizing information in safe ways.
You're right. You are very busy. I imagine you must be very organized.
I try to be.
What drew you to work in Indigenous health, though?
Okay, so since I was little, I always wanted to be a doctor. That was my number one. I wanted to help people. I wanted to work in healthcare. I just always had an interest in health. So I went to university for my undergrad. It was in biology well, I started at Laurentian and then I transferred to Trent University. And throughout that degree, I started taking courses in epidemiology and health research. And I just realized that I was more passionate about that side of healthcare rather than patient facing care. And just through talking with different teachers and mentors, I realized that research can have a very big impact on the health system as a whole. And I think that in Northern Ontario, in the region that we live, there is, it's a lack of people that are doing this type of work right now. So I thought that if I started, it might encourage other people to do this work. I'm not by any means the only person who does this work. There's just not a lot of people that do it. So I wanted to join the club, I guess, and help expand it through my work as well. Because one thing that I hear often is like a good way to shape the system is to work within it and try and affect change within the system. So that's where I'm at in why I wanted to work in health research.
Oh, miigwech. You were at the recent Anishinaabeg Nation Health Conference and you delivered a seminar on data sovereignty and governance in health research. We can kind of chat about the kind of things that you shared at the conference, but I'm interested in more a little deeper dive, kind of exploring these concepts of data sovereignty, data governance, Indigenous data sovereignty. Just to start then, like what do these concepts mean?
Yeah, so I feel like for a lot of people, the concepts of data and research, they're very abstract, but there are some really cool ways that these things can be explained. And I really like the way that the concept of data is explained in the OCAP course. We can talk about that a bit later too. But they divide it into three different categories. So you'll have data from First Nations, data about First Nations, and then data about lands and resources. And that kind of ends up covering every bit of information you could think of. So data from First Nations is considered to be information about our cultures, our languages, our histories, all of our stories and our knowledge and our ceremonies, just all those things that make us who we are as a people. Then there's data about First Nations. So these things are more of the demographics, the numbers, if you will. So things about our health and our economics, education, housing, the job market, like all the things that make the community like work. Like I don't know the right term for
Well, I
it, but
guess that sounds more like the the quantitative data,
Yes.
right? The quantitative data points. And then that first one you mentioned, the culture and language, it's more like the qualitative stuff, right?
Absolutely. And there's this third piece about lands and resources, which is super important, especially in this current political climate with Bill 5 and all these things. But that information about our ecology, our water, our animals, our plants, our medicines, um, if you know what it is, you know how to protect it. So it's good to have knowledge on these things and have like concrete information about it in our communities, in our band offices, or whoever's in charge of those things, to have that information easily accessible.
I guess the idea that we're including lands and resources as part of data in Indigenous research is recognizing social determinants of health, right, that are so tied to our lands and resources, but also just taking a more holistic view, right, of research or really looking at the bigger picture.
Absolutely. And I think that's a really important piece as an Indigenous researcher, just understanding that all of these things, all these concepts are interconnected. Our language and our culture and all of our stories and all those things, they wouldn't exist without the land and resources and just who we are as a people. Like we're connected in many ways. Yeah. So our approaches then to health and economics and education and housing, like they're all going to have the notions of our teachings, which means they're all going to involve the lands and resources. Like it's just all connected all together. So to have these things all be considered as data to me is common sense as an Indigenous researcher, but it might not be for people who aren't First Nation, Inuit, Métis. So it's an interesting perspective for sure.
Okay, so you started by talking about kind of a definition of data. Then
Mhm.
where do we go from there?
So we could jump into data governance, data sovereignty, and Indigenous data sovereignty. And I like to explain them kind of in that way because they all kind of build upon each other. So first, of course, we have data, like I explained what that was. But then data governance is what you do with that information. So when you're doing research, and I'm talking about research, but really like this is applicable anywhere. Like when you have information and you are collecting information, using it, analyzing it, sharing it. Um, so data governance is applicable anywhere. But what it is anything you're doing with information, um, very generally speaking. Data sovereignty, on the other hand, is the concept that data and data governance is subject to different laws, depending on the country you're in, the organization you work for, the community you live in. There's going to be rules and regulations around how you can use that information, how you can store it, how you can share it. Like, some things are confidential versus other things can be public knowledge. Those things are concepts of data sovereignty. And then Indigenous data sovereignty, that refers to our people and our communities governing information within our teachings and our worldviews. So the way we're going to approach data is going to be informed by our teachings, our ceremonies, our stories and histories. And we have the right to do so. We can assert that right in any data collection or data use situation.
So why would you say that Indigenous data sovereignty is so important for our First Nation communities?
That's such a big question. I could talk for so long about that. Okay, so Indigenous data sovereignty is extremely important for communities because we need to be able to work within the systems that are created or that have been created and that continue to govern like the health system, the economy, all these things. These systems exist, and we as Indigenous people every day need to navigate them in a way that we need to always be making space for ourselves and our worldviews and our perspectives. The systems don't always allow us to make that space, or they make it really, really hard for us to take that space up. Indigenous data sovereignty, I guess I see it as a tool to assert that space, to take up, to have your voice be heard in a really tangible way when it comes to research. There's a really long lasting history of harm to our communities in the world of research and in various systems that are founded essentially on research and policy. So to be able to have a concept like Indigenous data sovereignty in which we can assert our rights as people and ensure that our worldviews are represented from the start is extremely important, and it can have lasting impacts. It's like a ripple effect almost. If that data is collected in a safe way that represents our worldviews, then that's going to trickle into the policies that are created. They're also going to represent our worldviews. That will then inform the way that things work in the system. And then the system might have more representation of our worldviews and our ways.
It's also about keeping our communities safe.
Yes, exactly. So yeah, that piece, it's the most important part to me, is making sure that people are able to assert their right to safety when it comes to research. Because like I said, research can take on many forms. It doesn't necessarily need to be like a scientist coming in and doing something. It can be many different things. It can be collection of information for progress reports that are given back to various organizations. It can be collecting artifacts and stories for a museum. It can be all these different things that sometimes people might not consider to be research, that then it's like if you're not aware of what's out there or how the system works, then you won't be able to protect yourself. So I guess that's my goal, is like the opposite of that, is to make sure that people are aware of these systems and the way that these things work and the way that they exist in our world, so that they have the ability to protect themselves.
We know that First Nations now really are being encouraged to protect their data by creating their own data governance plans. So, what would a data governance plan look like in a practical sense? And what do First Nations communities need to be able to create and implement data governance plans?
So, I can only answer this based on my perspective as an individual and, where I come from and our teachings and such. Like, essentially what I'm trying to say here is that data governance plans will look different depending on the various needs and worldviews of the specific communities. But generally speaking, how I envision a data governance plan to look like would be almost like a list, a checklist of some sort, where communities can say, we believe that our data will be safe if this researcher or this organization can do X, Y, and Z with our information. And like, it's a set of rules, I guess, or a set of expectations that communities can assert to make sure that their information is being collected and used and analyzed in a way that they deem safe and relevant to their worldviews. I think that's a good way to put it.
So, what kind of expectations or rules would a First Nation want to include on this checklist to ensure that their data will be safe?
There are some principles that exist that can be used to assert data sovereignty, and those might help inform data governance plans for communities. The First Nations Information Governance Center, they created the principles of OCAP that stand for ownership, control, access, and possession. And they go really deep into detail on like what those different things stand for. So ownership stands for the right for First Nations to own their cultural knowledge, to own their information, to own anything that pertains to their community. Control means that First Nation communities or First Nation organizations can control all aspects of research that pertains to them, all aspects of how the information is used. Then access refers to the fact that First Nations can access their information at any given point, regardless of where it's stored. And then possession means that First Nations can assert the way that the information is owned, like in a concrete way, physically, like how this information is owned. So I guess an easy example of that would be like if I'm doing a research project and I save it on a USB, who gets to take care of that USB? That would be the principle of possession. So that's why like the principles of OCAP, the First Nations Information Governance Center, like they created these general principles. But to my understanding, based on different presentations that I've seen from people who work at the FNIGC, they state that it's important for these principles to be asserted, but in a way that's really specific to the community or the individual involved in the work. So, it's one thing for researchers to say, or for organizations to say, like, we're following OCAP principles, but then that's where communities would come in and assert exactly how they want to exercise their right to own information, to control, to access, to possess the information. So then that's where communities have that opportunity to get really specific and create their data governance plans in a way that really represents exactly what they need and exactly how they want to protect themselves.
Is this also like data governance or Indigenous data sovereignty? I guess that's also related, say, to UNDRIP, United Nations Declaration on the Rights of Indigenous People, or say in Canada, the Tri-Council Policy Statement on Ethical Conduct for Research Involving Humans, right? The TCPS2 and their guidelines for working with Indigenous peoples. So does that also fall into these concepts of Indigenous data governance and Indigenous data sovereignty?
Absolutely. They do all fall into these concepts. And the way that I see it as someone who works within, like, that works at a research institute and that needs to interact with things like UNDRIP and TCPS2, they're very generalized things, not in a bad way. It's just because there's so many different worldviews. Each community has a different worldview at the end of the day. We have different histories, we have different stories. They might be similar, but they're individual and unique to each community. So things like UNDRIP, TCPS2, they need to cover all of the communities in Canada, basically, or the world when we're looking at UNDRIP. So they're going to have a really generalized approach to these concepts, and it's a good starting point. But now, like, my role and my interests and my work is to dive really deep into that and actually talk to individual communities to see, like, with these baseline things that we have from UNDRIP, from TCPS2, from different organizations, how can we tailor that to your teachings and your worldviews so that you specifically can control this information exactly how you want to?
Okay, that makes sense. So it's almost like UNDRIP and TCPS2 are like a kind of legal framework that does need to be respected. And then part of your work is really bringing this to the community level.
Exactly. Because it can get very overwhelming too to hear these terms and, all of the information that's being shared. Even I find myself getting overwhelmed sometimes, and I'm a researcher, so I can only imagine how some of our leaders might feel if they're not professionals in the field. So, really taking the information and working with communities to share it and work with it in a way that everyone can understand and like digest, I guess, is a priority of mine because I think that's the only way you can really protect yourself is to understand the tools that you can use to do so. So yeah, that's really what my work is based in, is just helping communities move forward in their work in a safe way.
You mentioned that at the Anishinaabe Nation Fall Grand Council Assembly, a resolution was passed about the development of a relationship protocol with Health Science North Research Institute and the Anishinaabe Nation. This relationship protocol will outline the role of Health Sciences North Research Institute as a partnering organization that will provide an advisory role in the development of research protocol agreements with Anishinaabe First Nations. So how is it hoped that this relationship will help First Nations develop or create their data governance plans?
Yeah, so first of all, I'm very grateful for this to have been a motion that passed. It just gives me that much more inspiration to do the work that I'm doing, knowing that our leaders support this type of work. But essentially this motion, what I'm hoping, what other researchers and people involved are hoping that this leads to is a really good working relationship between HSNRI and the Anishinaabe Nation, the Anishinaabe Nation communities. And when it comes to data governance protocols, having a working relationship with the Anishinaabe Nation can hopefully lead to some really meaningful projects in that specific domain of data governance. Perhaps environmental scans, which is a type of research projects that helps get a general understanding or overview of what different, in this case, what different communities' perspectives are on data governance. So that could be one hopeful project where we can really get an understanding of where communities are at when it comes to data governance, what their needs might be, how we could support them as a research institute in achieving these needs, whether it's to create an entire plan from the start or create a template for them to kind of do their own thing afterwards. But just really what this relationship is going to do regarding data governance is create this space where this conversation can be had in a way that's supported in different ways, supported from a research perspective with people who are knowledgeable in that sort of field, but then also supported in a cultural way where we have knowledge holders and we have people within the Anishinaabe Nation that are super knowledgeable about governance within our worldviews and our ways of doing so. So how do we bring that together, I guess, to create these plans so that communities can be protected in a way that, just again, is relevant to them, relevant to their worldviews, but also relevant to the systems in which we need to protect ourselves in. So that's where we're at now. We are hoping to ask communities like, what's feasible for you and what would you need for this to happen and how can we help, kind of thing.
Okay, so then it's making room for a bigger conversation about data governance, but then hopefully also helping communities, say if they're developing templates so that not every community has to start this process from scratch, that they kind of have a framework to work with. Do you have a sense then of where First Nations are at? Or like say in our Anishinaabe Nation?
Yeah. And of course, it's understood that communities are all in different places. Like some communities might have full research governance expectations or templates or documents already in place, whereas other communities might have never had this conversation before and have no clue where to start. So really, that's where the idea is at right now, is just getting an understanding of where everyone's at and how we can support each other in this process. So I don't have a specific document that outlines where people are at, but I do have some awareness of specifically our communities on Manitoulin Island. There is the Manitoulin Anishinaabe Research Review Committee, which to my understanding is a collective of representatives from different organizations and communities on the island that come together to review different research proposals and provide feedback to the researchers or to the organizations that are coming in to make sure that their projects are in line with their data governance standards or what their communities might need and make sure that they're being protected. I don't know exactly what their frameworks are or their approach to their review process, but I do know that this committee exists, so they could be a very prominent leader or example, I guess, for our other communities, should that be something that those communities are interested in.
Okay, so that's an example of something that's already been established that communities can look to. You had mentioned that idea of systemic harms as a result of research or the use of Indigenous data. Is this still an ongoing concern with First Nations, systemic harm happening? Like, can you talk to that?
Yeah, of course. I'd say that absolutely yes, it's an ongoing concern with our communities. There exists such a long-winded history of harm when it comes to research with our communities. And I'm not going to list specific examples because I know that in this moment I won't be able to do justice to any individual story. But generally speaking, there are so many just incidences of in health research, like people being subject to very harmful experiments, like with their bodies or procedures that cause lasting harm. There are groups and communities that were subject to very harmful conditions, again, in the name of experimentation. There's like a historical research or archival type of harm as well, artifacts being taken from communities, data being used or documents being used for research and then being destroyed or not returned to the community, stories being like used in a research project and then being shared widely when maybe that story wasn't meant to be shared publicly in that way. Teachings and ceremony, songs, like all these things that are misappropriated through research because maybe the person or the organization in charge of that project like shouldn't have been in charge because they themselves didn't have the knowledge or teachings to handle that information in a way that did it justice in an appropriate way. And I could go on and on, like there's so many incidences of harm and that causes a lasting impact. There are a lot of strides forward. I mean, like we discussed earlier, UNDRIP and TCPS and the OCAP principles and Indigenous researchers that are trailblazing in the field and organizations like the Manitoulin Anishinaabeg Research Review Committee. All these things come together to help work against this harm and try to make things easier and better for our communities. But ultimately, like it is an ongoing concern, and I think it's going to be for a very long time until that trust can be established. And that's not up to researchers, it's not up to organizations, it's up to the communities. Like once they see that things are better, then that trust will begin to bloom. It's something that'll just take time and consistent work and effort and just collaboration ultimately to make sure that everyone is respecting each other and doing right by the data.
You mentioned earlier we were chatting about moving away from like deficit-based perceptions of communities and to do research more, say that's more strengths-based or more positive-based research as well.
Yeah, so that's another piece of it. Language is a big thing. The way things are reported upon, the way that we speak about certain topics in the past and still today, like it's very common to see research be reported in a deficits-based language, talking about how communities are lacking in whatever topic or there's something missing, there's something that needs to be done better. Like it's always from that negative point of view. And it's really important to recognize those things, but there's a way to talk about them that doesn't subscribe to these narratives and stereotypes about our people that were created, within these systemic harms, I guess. So you'll often see Indigenous researchers, and not only Indigenous researchers, but just health equity researchers or people who are interested in being equitable in their work. They're going to report on topics in a strengths-based perspective, or in a way that speaks to life promotion and just like really reports on the successes. And here's something we found that people are doing really well in their communities. Here's how we can continue doing this well, or here's how this can be applied to a different situation for it to go well also. So you're reporting it in a way where people are doing good and there's something positive happening, and that helps dismantle those stereotypes. You know, you want to make sure that the way you speak about things is safe, but also is positive and fostering this environment for social change, this environment for a shift in perspective for the general public about our communities.
And our communities then, as part of asserting their own Indigenous data governance or Indigenous data sovereignty, then they can also ensure that these kind of positive viewpoints are being put forward.
Yeah. So that's another piece of it that honestly, like I've only recently started thinking about, and I think it's when I started studying Anishinaabemowin more deeply. And this might be like a really funny thing to say, but I just realized how much language actually matters, in the sense that like the specific words that you use and the way that your tone is being conveyed and the way that you say things has a really big impact and could have a bigger impact than you might think. Again, going back to those ways of reporting things, like if you're only reporting from a deficits-based perspective, you might not realize it in the moment, but you are essentially contributing to negative stereotypes about our people. But if you really put in an effort to report from a strengths-based perspective, then that might change the way one person sees our communities and sees our people. And that to me is a really big impact. They might no longer see our people as communities that are like lacking in certain things, but rather communities that are very knowledgeable on topics and have different perspectives. Different isn't always bad. It's never bad, really. It's just a different way to do things. And that way is positive in our worldview. So conveying that to the general public is something that I've really started to want to focus on more, and just make sure that the language that I'm using is positive and is from that strengths-based perspective.
I'm interested in the tie between, how do you find that now that you're really immersed in learning Anishinaabemowin, how do you find that's really impacting your work in research?
I think that it's really changing my perspective, and I'm still kind of grappling with these thoughts, so I don't have like a true conclusion or a true answer to that question. But I think what it's doing is that it's changing my perspective on pretty much everything, like just the way that I see the world. One of the most basic examples of this is like when I realized that we don't have a word for garbage in Anishinaabemowin. Speakers have like invented words, I guess, or invented a string of words that will convey the idea of garbage. But like our people, we don't have garbage. We use every piece of things. Like you can always repurpose something. You can always, everything has a purpose. So you wouldn't throw something out. So there's no word for that. Like that's just a really basic example of how deep the connection between worldview and language really is. We also don't have a word for borrowing, because if you give something to someone, like that's theirs now. You're not gonna give it back in the way that we see it. Like it's just something that you gave to someone else. I don't know, just all these examples of different words that in English or French are very simple day-to-day words. They don't even exist in our language because our worldview is just that different. So then it's changing the way that I see my role as a researcher and the work that I'm doing, because it is very different. We're trying to, and again, nothing that I'm saying right now is groundbreaking. Like it's very basic in the sense that, like, of course our worldview is different, and of course it's going to have a hard time fitting in like a Western system. But I'm just really feeling that impact now that I'm studying the language and learning a lot more about the origin of our people. Um, yeah, it's just changing me as a person.
Mm.
Now it's like not only am I trying to find my footing as like a young professional starting my career, I'm also trying to find my footing as someone who's like currently learning about our worldviews and trying to apply them to a very um, systemic, a very Western thing like research. Yeah, it's an interesting time in my life right now.
I think it's a perfect time for you to be learning these things. It's an amazing time for you at the beginning of your career, also integrating, learning about these indigenous worldviews as you go forward. Are you finding also, is this kind of informing your understanding of what you mentioned of this connection between ceremony and data sharing?
So that quote that I used in my presentation, data sharing as ceremony, think of data sharing as ceremony, that comes from an elder in Manitoba. He's from northern Manitoba, and I'm really sad that I didn't get his name because I didn't realize at the time like how much his words would impact the way that I see things. But he was just speaking to me in between presentations when I went to the First Nations Health and Social Secretariat of Manitoba Data Governance Conference earlier this year. He was just speaking to the fact that when people are sharing information, and this was specific to health research because that was what the conference was about, but it can touch upon any domain of research. It doesn't just need to be in health. But what he said was when people are sharing information, depending on your research project, they're giving you a piece of themselves, right? So that piece of who they are, whether it's like a piece of their health information or their perspective on an experience or an actual piece of themselves, like their blood or something to contribute to your project, that's a ceremony. Like that's them exchanging their information for you to then like return that information or return that piece in the form of a research project that's completed or a policy that's resulting from whatever you're analyzing. So there's a ceremony in that exchange. And then he went on to, and I'm butchering this explanation right now, but he went on to explain how often as researchers, like we will just see those things as numbers after, like once that exchange is done, you'll just see it as a piece of your spreadsheet or you'll see it as, just one cog in your big machine of your research project. But you always need to remember that that piece that person shared, no matter how small it might be, is the essence of who they are as a person. So that needs to live on and that needs to be respected throughout the entirety of your project and afterwards. Like that piece is always who that person is and it's always going to live on. So it's viewing things through Anishinaabe worldview, I guess, like really just seeing how these things are all interconnected and it's a piece of someone's spirit. It's not just this transactional exchange. It's something that's much deeper than what we're taught to believe it is when we're learning to be researchers in school. Like there's just this whole other world of ceremony and knowledge and teachings that like I haven't even really fully understood yet. I think like I'm still really learning these things too. And I think I'm always going to be learning these things. And I think that's kind of the point, is that there's never an end time where you're like, okay, I know everything there is to know about the concept of ceremony within the world of research. Like there's just always going to be a new thing that happens or, an experience that will change or further inform your perspective on this topic. So again, like I can't give it justice the way that I even want to right now because I'm still trying to grapple with the concept of data sharing as ceremony. But I think it's really important to share that with people because, well, hopefully it does the way that it did with me, gets people to reflect on that and to reflect on like the impacts of our worldview in something so Western as research. Because then I heard this data sharing as ceremony piece and I thought back and I was like, you know what? Like Indigenous people are scientists, because how did we know what medicines did what? How did we know what animals came around and when, and everything that we know about the cosmos and everything we know about just like every piece of our ceremony. And that's all research. We observed animals, we observed plants, we observed the seasons. That's research. We spoke with other people, we asked questions, we figured things out, and we continue to do that today. So it's just, we as a people are scientific people. We're just scientific people in a way that's different than Western science.
That's very profound. I think just as Indigenous people, if we're kind of familiar with the idea of ceremony and the intent behind ceremony, how important it is to really respect these promises we're making to each other, right? Then, that should influence you moving forward. So, well, I guess just to conclude, just back on our topic of data governance and data sovereignty, what kind of next steps or what kind of things are you looking forward to happening in the next year in this area?
I'm really excited to see where the partnership with Anishinaabe Nation is going to lead us, because I think that this is a really good opportunity to get started on some of this work that I understand has been talked about for a really long time. So I'm happy to be someone who's able to kind of provide that starting point in a way. But also, I guess, a little bit selfishly, I'm really excited to start my research for my PhD. It's all about Tikanagans and the teachings and just like early life for Anishinaabe people and like specifically within our worldview and within our teachings. So I'm excited because really the basis of my PhD project was hearing an elder say, hey, healthy nations start with healthy babies. Right. And so that's how I started getting my interest in the work that I want to do for my schooling. But yeah, I'm really excited for that research. But I am very excited just to see in general how this work evolves in the next couple of years, because it almost seems like I came into my role at a perfect time where people started being interested in this topic just before I started working in this role. So a lot of people are interested in exploring it, and I'm really excited to do that too.
Great. So it sounds like there's kind of developing a critical mass of communities who are really interested in making sure they have their data sovereignty and data governance plans together and really having some really good conversations about what this means for us as Anishinaabe Nation First Nations.
Yeah.
Well, anything else you'd like to share with us?
No. Can I plug my small business? Just kidding.
Why? What is it?
It's called Wajash Creations. I make ribbon skirts and ribbon shirts. You can find me on Instagram.
Awesome. Well, Riley, miigwech for chatting with us and sharing your knowledge about data sovereignty. And I wish you all the best in your work with the Health Sciences North Research Institute and all the other things you're involved in, the language and working with your community and your PhD research and your small business and creative endeavors as well. So, miigwech for joining us today.
Miigwech for having me. I really enjoyed this.
Miigwech to Riley Restool for taking part in the podcast, and to the Anishinaabe Nation Health Department for supporting this episode. To learn more about Indigenous data sovereignty and to download a transcript of this episode, find the links in the podcast description. This episode includes the tracks Minopamatsuin by Nigel Irwin and Chippewa Travelers, and A Very Warm Welcome by Justin Delorme, provided by Nagamo Publishing. Miigwech for listening to Bamadzajig Inonindwa. Until next time, Bama P.